Thank you, Katrina, and good afternoon or good morning to you from wherever you're joining us. Welcome to the launch of our fourth workforce plan here at the Future Skills Organisation, titled Mixed Signals, Future Opportunities. Before we start, I'd like to let you know we are recording today's session and we are going to be using AI tools to produce a transcript. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and pay my respects to elders past and present. And for me today, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So the structure of the next hour, we're going to provide a quick overview of the findings from this year's workforce plan, and then we'll move into questions with an excellent group of panelists that we pulled together today. And then we'll have about 10 minutes or so at the end for any audience questions. So as we progress through, please do drop them in the chat. We will have somebody monitoring that and there will be time to address them. So a little bit of context before we start. The workforce plan is one of our core products. Its core purpose is not only to understand the current and future state of finance, technology and business, but also to inform our other activities and particularly training product development. This year's plan consists of a series of documents, as well as a really exciting workforce intelligence platform that we're launching today. It's also supported by a very detailed workforce and skills analysis that looks at the skills and the qualifications required to deliver those skills. We also have a series of deep dives into migration. We've updated our work on workforce projections, and my colleague Peter Scugins, our Senior Manager, Planning and Research, will take us through that and the findings of the plan in more detail in just a minute. I would like to recognise the work of the team. All of that has been built internally. The Workforce Intelligence Platform we're really excited about. We would love you to engage and interact with that. Give us any feedback. We have tested it pretty thoroughly, but give us any feedback if there are any additional features that you think we should include. We're really eager to hear what that could be and ensure that we're meeting the needs of our stakeholders. So this year's plan has been built on several streams of data. It brings together labour market and education data, it brings together stakeholder evidence, and it brings together also wider literature. So it gives us a few different angles to read the shifts that are occurring in the finance, technology and business workforces, and allows us to think about the evidence from different lenses. The title we've picked for this year's plan, Mixed Signals, Future Opportunities, is really deliberate. So over the course of the last 9 months that we've been developing it, we've identified that the labour market is not simply strong or weak, and the message is not that simply AI is replacing jobs or creating them. It's that growth and disruption and transition are all happening at the same time. And that's really the defining feature of the finance, technology and business workforce in 2026. So we've pulled together 3 evidence streams. First, the quantitative data, so workforce size, composition, education enrolments and outcomes, migration trends. That really gives us a base picture of what's happening and some suggestions about what's going to be happening next. We've overlaid on top of that stakeholder evidence. So we ran a series of workforce roadshows over the last 12 months, various meetings, interviews, engagement through our task forces and our strategic advisory committee. And this is really important because what that has been telling us is why and how that data. So it really helps explain what is being experienced in workplaces and training settings and gives a bit of colour to what that headline data is telling us. Thirdly, we've undertaken a range of research based on policy documents, grey literature, international research. So this has given us a way of testing the Australian evidence against a broader direction of change, particularly around AI, which we know is moving so quickly, but also around leadership capability, technology adoption. Over the course of 2026 and through 2027, we will be releasing a series of additional documents throughout the rest of this year, including a detailed digital skills analysis, as well as further work on AI and its impact on finance, technology and business. So before I hand over to Peter, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, but also thank you to our stakeholders from across unions, industry, education and government who have all contributed in some way to the workforce plan over the last 12 months. We are really grateful for your time and insights. With that, I will hand over to Peter Scutchins, who will take us through a high-level overview of what this year's workforce plan tells us.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. And Katrina, can we move to the next slide, please? Beautiful. Thank you. So just to give a recap of the Workforce Plan 2026 Mixed Signals Future Opportunities, we have found that there are 5 major trends that are impacting across all of our sectors with an underlying theme of equity and participation, which is really embedded right across the entire transition that we are seeing. So across finance, tech and business, the workforce is still growing, but the type of work, the skills needed and the pathways into these sectors are all shifting at the same time. And this is why we have framed the plan this year around transition. The message is that growth and disruption are all happening at the same time, and that makes the picture more complicated than a traditional skills shortage story. Across all 3 sectors, there are 5 trends occurring at the same time, so these trends up on the screen, and that underlying trend of equity and participation. The first trend is that the labour market is showing mixed signals, and hence the title of the report. Employment has continued to grow, but hiring conditions are softer, graduate and entry-level recruitment is contracting, and we're seeing restructuring and redundancies in some parts of the workforce. The reasons for this transition are multifaceted, including post-pandemic overhiring being reset to demand, slowing economic growth that's impacting right across our sectors, and cyclical turnover. The second major trend is that AI is already reshaping FTB, finance, tech and business roles. The strongest evidence right now points to task change rather than wholesale job replacement. Routine clerical and administration roles are changing the fastest, while many professional roles are being augmented by AI, with changing expectations around judgment, communication, and the ability to test AI outputs. Our third trend is that generative AI is only part of the overall technology story. The plan looks at wider technology shifts, including data centre investment, data sovereignty, AI orchestration, and quantum computing, because these will shape the future workforce demand, even where that labour market impacts are still emerging. Our fourth major trend is leadership skills, a leadership capability that is not keeping up. This came through very strongly in our evidence and particularly through our stakeholder feedback. Existing managers are being asked to perform tasks that these roles have not previously required, increasingly related to AI changes in the workplace. Effective and responsible AI adoption rests on where the leaders and managers can redesign work around these tools, effectively govern their use, and support their people through those changes. The fifth trend is that the education and training system is being stretched. The skills that employers and workers increasingly need, AI literacy, judgment, governance, critical thinking, and the ability to work with these systems, are not yet consistently reflected in education and training. And the pace of that technology change is much faster than traditional education and training product development cycles. And underneath all of these themes are the equity and participation questions. There is a risk that this transition will not affect everyone evenly. Women are overrepresented in many of the roles most exposed to generative AI automation. Small businesses have less access to structured training. Regional workforces face additional barriers related to regional and remote access. And the evidence base on First Nations participation in finance, tech and business is still too thin. So along with these mixed signals represented across these themes, there are future opportunities. The plan is clear about these risks, but it's also pointing to opportunities around building capability, supporting better transitions, and making sure that the benefits of change are not limited to people and organisations that are already the best positioned to adapt to them. Okay, Katrina, next slide, please. So looking at our 3 sectors now in a little bit more detail. The good news is that all 3 sectors have continued to grow into 2025. So together, finance, technology and business occupations now employ more than 3.5 million Australians, and all three workforces to continue to expand into 2025. But the similarities largely stop there. There is a lot of nuance that occurs underneath those headline figures. So finance is now at around 191,000 workers and has grown 16% over the decade. But the key story here is not workforce size, it's capability change. Finance is the most generative AI exposed industry across both automation and augmentation in Australia. So, while at the same time, it's also dealing with significant regulatory reform, including things like sustainable finance disclosures and expanded anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing obligations. When we get to technology, we're seeing a slightly different story. So our technology sector has experienced the strongest growth of all three at 51% over the decade to around 690,000 workers. But many of the signals that have typically defined the tech sector around shortages, really strong graduate outcomes and rapid hiring are starting to weaken. Stakeholders are consistently reporting that the entry level in particular is narrowing. And our business workforce is the largest of all three. We're looking at more than 10 million workers in business occupations across Australia, growing around 22% over the decade. But that growth is becoming increasingly uneven. Professional, managerial and advisory roles continue to grow, while the clerical and administrative occupations that are most exposed to AI are under continued pressure. That pattern has been building for years through digitisation, and AI is really continuing to accelerate that. Next slide, please, Katrina. Okay, so our workforce plan this year is not just a written report. It sits within this broader workforce intelligence platform that we're really excited to be launching today. This is a connected set of tools designed to help people access the evidence in the way that works best for them. So we're really excited to be able to provide this to all of our users. We've deliberately structured the platform around three simple ways of engaging with this evidence: read, ask, and explore. The read part is about the workforce plan itself, and we are really hoping that everyone reads the fantastic report. So you can jump into the workforce plan report and the technical papers that Tim has already mentioned, and have a really solid read through those and the narrative that is underpinning the workforce plan this year. The ask part is about our new agent. So we are now letting our users ask plain English questions and get evidence-based answers drawn from the workforce plan and from the underlying data sets. The important part here that this is focused. It's not a general purpose AI tool that can answer everything. This is giving you the capability to go onto our intelligence platform and ask questions that are specifically based in the data and in the reports. And then we have our explore part, which is for people who really want to go deeper into the data. Users can dig into workforce education, migration and projections data through the dashboards, along with our mapping and our comparison tools. You can also download some of this data through our new download functionality. The platform has been built internally from the ground up by our fantastic data team here at Future Skills Organisation. Based on stakeholder feedback off of last year's workforce dashboards, and this came through very strongly in our workforce roadshows this year as well, that people really wanted to see more functionality through those dashboards and in how we do present our workforce intelligence base. The report talks a lot about using technology well, building capability and making evidence easier to act on. So this platform is one example of that. It's us here at FSO using technology to make workforce intelligence more accessible and more useful for our users. But critically, this is a product people can jump into and use today and is going to continue evolving over time. We'll be looking at how people are using it, the types of questions that people are extracting information out of the agent, and what improvements should be made to make this even more useful for all of our users. So we're really looking forward to getting feedback across the entire workforce intelligence platform and making sure that we are able to evolve it into the next stage of a really useful intelligence base for everyone. Thank you, Katrina. Next slide. So this gives us an overview now of the workforce plan. I'm going to hand back over to Tim, who is going to introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Peter. I'd just like to echo your comments. Absolutely, Eric and the team have done an amazing job in building these tools from the ground up, so full credit to them. I'd like to introduce each of our panelists. Really grateful for their time and expertise today. Scott Cowan is the Assistant National Secretary at the Australian Services Union. Brett Hall is the General Manager at the Australian Industry Group. Amanda Linton is CEO at the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers. Elizabeth Whitelock is the CEO at the Australian Information Industry Association. And Louisa Grant is the Industry Skills and Jobs Advisor Manager at the Australian Computer Society. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Louisa, and particularly sort of thinking about the mixed signals theme. So one of the challenges that we've had this year, and I think one of the challenges we're seeing not only in Australia, but globally, is that a lot of this workforce data is kind of backwards looking and retrospective. But having said that, we did find that whilst tech employment is continuing to grow, that there is also these long-standing skill shortages are starting to ease. And as Peter said, the graduate hiring and entry-level pathways are starting to narrow. Is that consistent with what your members are telling you? Is that consistent with what you're hearing across the tech sector?
Yes, it is. So we're definitely hearing about the entry-level squeeze. AI is taking some of those entry-level jobs and particularly around coding, software development. So we're definitely hearing that. We're also hearing in regional Queensland, obviously that's where I'm based, and we've just in the middle of doing a series of round tables, is that they're struggling for employees and can't get them. So they're turning to offshoring a lot of the time to be able to fulfill their workforce needs. Yet we have this entry-level squeeze sitting there as well. So it's definitely producing these mixed signals, and the data is very telling because we can see what's, contracting and what's actually increasing, and 100% concur with FSO's findings that it's the jobs that are actually increasing are the multi-dimensional jobs that need risk, governance, storytelling, business planning. So it seems to me the workforce is struggling to fill that niche area where they need a person across a lot of different skills rather than just one.
Excellent. Just a quick follow-up question. So that inability to find talent that you're hearing about, what do you think some of the reasons for that is?
I think it's particularly around regional Queensland. I don't think major cities have such an issue. Particularly, we've got a bit of offloading that's happening now with the larger organisations shedding jobs a little bit for that correction, as we've noticed. I feel that what happens in regional areas in general, they go to university there, but then they leave very quickly to go to the city areas because they get better pay, more opportunity, more promotions, and regional businesses. And we do have a lot of tech businesses in regional areas just can't compete with it. So they're competing with people that on money, it's just not going to, and so the only thing they can offer is other benefits, but it's very difficult for them to compete. So they keep them while they're young, but as soon as they get a little bit of experience, they're off and they're on to, bigger, better things.
Thanks, Louisa. Scott, I'm going to move on to you, and AI impacting jobs, and particularly generative AI and the exposure of finance technology and business jobs. What are you seeing as the impact of AI? What's the experiences of your members, of workers? Are you seeing jobs changing that much, and are workers being brought along with this change?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Look, we've had a survey of our members, which is almost a year old now. We're in the process of resurveying our members to then measure what's changed over the last 12 months in this space. But in the order of 75% of our members reported to us that they've been directed to use AI in some way, shape or form in their work. But more concerningly, those same workers, only 15% told us they were receiving training in the work that they were doing. So it's certainly changing work. How it's changing the work of our members and workers in general, I think it depends on sectors, it depends on workplaces. I guess what I would say when we're talking about work and transformation in this space, I'd encourage people to think of it not only as jobs or job descriptions, but the workers for an organisation, because I feel like AI can either be imposed on workers or be implemented with direct worker and worker representative input. And if you are able to achieve that within a workplace, you're probably going to meet your productivity gains that you're looking to achieve through the work of AI. You're going to receive, hopefully, that worker confidence to go forward in what transformations you're looking to do with your business. But then also, very importantly, I think in this space, when we're talking about new technology and trust, that social license that most employers in this space rely on can be damaged if you don't go through that properly. So, I would say, worker consultation through this and bringing your workforce with you is critically important to the successful adaptation.
Yeah, that resonates with us, and Peter's nodding next to me. That's certainly something that we heard through the course of the workforce roadshows as well. I was quite concerned to hear about that sort of finding of 15% of your members have received AI training. Is that largely due to, why is that?
I think it's primarily because of the newness, if I can describe it that way, of the technology. We've got when I say our members, this is our members across the board, and the ASU represents workers right across the economy, including in call centres, administrative and clerical work in local government, as well as in the IT and business sector. So it's broader than just that. But I can imagine, I think the earlier speaker spoke about small business being limited in terms of what training it may be able to resource for its staff. I would imagine our members working in community service organisations, for example, would have similar struggles there in being able to arm their employees with the best training required. And I think there's really going to have to require a all of government approach, really, as we work together collectively to improve the sector. Otherwise, the country will be left behind on that.
Absolutely agree. I will just give a plug to the work of FSO in the generalist AI units competence that we've been working on, and more information is available on our website, and we'll drop information if you're interested in that particular project into the chat. Thank you, Scott. Elizabeth, so changes beyond tech. The plan, found obviously generative AI is having a significant impact and really quickly on the finance sector businesses' workforces, but also other things like data center investment and builds, quantum computing, orchestration of multiple AI systems. All of these are emerging at pace as the next kind of capability requirement. And building on to what Scott said, there's almost no accredited training address, particularly the orchestration specifically. Is that sort of next set of skills the next bottleneck for your members? Is there other things beyond generative AI that you think deserves more attention?
You're spot on all of those aspects, and what we've heard from Louisa and from Scott, we see it amongst our member base as well. So our member base is across the country, 53% SME. And so we hear the same problems. So regardless of whether it's AI or whether you're building a data center, the skills that are required just aren't readily available. So for a data center, as an example, if you're building that, you might need 150 electricians to build a data hall. You may need 450 to take out the entire data center. Now, in Melbourne, there are 1,200 in the Melbourne CBD electricians who are qualified. Now, if you've got data centers and other projects stacking up, there aren't enough electricians. So from a technology perspective, it's not just about coding, et cetera. It's not about those things that we associate with computers. It's also all of this other piece to the backbone that is the infrastructure that becomes the critical piece for us upskilling our workforce to implement and take on board the productivity gains that come with AI. And then on top of that, you have quantum coming at us as well. ASD saying, let's get prepared. You're going to have to get cryptology in place because it's coming. And the reality is it's probably here already in some shape or form. And yet, have we done and dealt with the AI piece? And here we are taking on board a quantum piece as well. And so I feel like if you're a small business, you're probably looking at all of this and thinking, how do I cope? And having done some SME forums around AI specifically, the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt around it are overwhelming for many. And I think when they look at their businesses, they go, what part of this can I really take on board as AI? What part can help me improve my business without affecting necessarily my clients or my staff? And so the starting point is perhaps something that can be overwhelming. So while we talk about, introducing various pieces of Gen AI, what is it that I'm solving? What are the manual repetitive tasks, as an example, that I can replace with a piece of technology that augments our business, that augments my people, that allows them to do their job better and service our clients more? So I think there's a fundamental set of questions that we need to be helping them to identify before you even figure out, is it Claude? Is it ChatGPT? Is it Copilot? What is it that I need to use? In fact, what problem am I trying to solve?
Absolutely. And that really resonates with us. We do get asked a lot, particularly by small to medium enterprises, about where should we start here. It does overwhelm. And again, picking up your other comment, it's the capability to use these tools that I think is missing often,
Spot on.
rather than kind of basic kind of tool usage. So absolutely. Brett, Australian Industry Group. We've talked a lot about leadership capability, and obviously building on Elizabeth's comments and the findings of the plan itself, it's not just the technology itself, but it's the leadership is going to be the main thing that determines whether AI in particular, but also these other technological advancements that we're talking about, whether that turns into productivity gains. Is that matching with what you're hearing from your members, or are there other kind of blockers at play here?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's probably a few threads to answering that question. And the first is just the nature of the finance, tech, and business workforce, the nature of those occupations. I mean, finance, tech, and business is not a neatly defined industry that has all of its workers sitting in a nice, neat industry. In reality, there's not a lot of industries that operate in that way, but finance, tech, and business is on the complete other end of the spectrum in terms of these occupations are critical across pretty much every business across the entirety of the labour market. So we are talking about these roles across the economy as a whole, as opposed to talking solely about a finance business or a tech business or whatever it may be in isolation. And what that means is that the demand for talent and the potential competition for talent is quite significant across the length and breadth of the economy. And certainly when we speak to members across the economy through our role at Australian Industry Group and talk about skills and workforce shortages, the two that always come up time and time again is technicians and trades, and professions is where the most significant workforce shortages are generally occurring in most parts of the country. Leadership and management capability is absolutely critical. And look, when I was going through the workforce plan and looking at some of the findings there, it was great to see that leadership and management is identified in there as an important issue, because that certainly aligns with what comes through all of our work across the business community and through our research more broadly. But there was a point in there that I think is really important to highlight, which is it's an enabler of almost everything else in the workforce plan. Because the introduction of technology, be it AI or be it in a manufacturing context through an expensive new machine or any other business context, investing in the technology and bringing the technology into the business doesn't in and of itself provide a productivity uplift or a benefit. It is everything that sits around that in terms of what happens before the technology is brought in, while the technology is brought in, and after the technology that's brought in, that is going to determine whether or not that's successful. And a lot of that is then around the leadership management capabilities in lots of different forms that sit there. Leadership management has always been important, but there are some particular new emerging complexities that are set out quite nicely in the workforce plan. So well done, FSO team, for that. The reality is that if you look at the global benchmarks, Australia has not ranked particularly well on management and leadership capability for some time. And there's a real opportunity to think about how industry, governments, education and training sector collectively can put in place some actions to start working towards turning that around.
Thanks, Brett. I love the way that you said at the end there about the collective effort. That is absolutely our number one sort of way of working here at FSO is this cannot be done in isolation. It is a collective effort across unions, industry, governments, and others. And we're not going to get there if we don't do it together, and we're not all pulling in the same direction. So great call out. Amanda, Institute of Certified Bookkeepers. So we've recognised the challenges around this keeping the skills system up to date. Or all education systems really globally are grappling with this, how to keep pace with the change that is being brought about by AI. Bookkeeping is one of the more exposed to AI occupations. What do you think? We've done some work with you earlier this year around bookkeeping training and the qualifications in bookkeeping. How can we possibly kind of keep pace and ensure that those qualifications are delivering the skills that your industry is looking for?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I suppose I'd like to kick it off by saying that not only for bookkeeping, but accounting and finance has been really probably disproportionately impacted in relation to AI. But the thing is, the conversation's actually not new. So there's been augmented AI in the sector for a very, very long time now. So to a certain extent, the narrative around the fact of bookkeeping being disrupted, and dare I say the naysayers of the industry who are saying you won't exist in 5 years, we've been hearing that narrative for the last 20 years. So we're not concerned in any way around the impact that AI is going to have as far as reducing the workforce size or the impact on from that perspective. What we are seeing, though, is that entry level point, as a couple of the other speakers have spoken about, is now the bar's being lifted. So whereas you might have hired a bookkeeper, 10 years ago, it was considered to be a data entry role. It was considered to just make sure everyone got paid on time. Whereas the actual role has shifted. It's now moved into more of making sure that we have customised business systems and for small business in particular in play, and that all of those systems are talking, data accuracy is good, etc. And then the advisory that comes off the back of that. What that's created, back to your question about the training system, is that we've actually noted that the training system and the current framework of education is built on a framework that is structured in such a way that it makes it very, very difficult for a training to be as quickly adaptive and applicable to what the market is demanding as what is now being required. So we know that the review process we've just undertaken, our core qualifications, Cert 4, we know in practical terms there's not a student in the country that'll get any benefit or impact of that for maybe another 18 months to 2 years, by which case or by which stage the world's moved on again. And so the skill set that we need has moved on again. So we do need to start thinking a bit more about how we structure training, moving away from this, we might use linear training, or what we currently have as linear training in place to get a core set of skills built underneath any kind of qualification. But we now need to start seriously thinking about how do we now bring into the accredited training system this concept of being able to stack a skill set as somebody actually needs it. And so, we constantly hear about linear training creates challenges in the respect of, well, I'm doing this training over here, but in reality, I don't actually need it. Employers are telling us employees are being caught up in traineeships and apprenticeships, studying content over here that they're not practically going to apply inside the business. So we're getting it from both sides as well. And so we need to start thinking about how do we now make the training system more flexible and with the ability to do that. So, and I think the way we do that, Tim, is to move away from this constant reliance on linear training and a qualification outcome to this concept of stacking and being able for employees and employers to invest in the training program as and when it's actually needed. So we have to develop our core competencies around the flexibility that's required for that. The other thing that I think it needs to happen is that, industry have a really significant role to play here. And now I'm not just suggesting for one moment that we now turn it into an open slather training and all industry accredited training, or all industry non-accredited training rather, makes it into the accredited framework. But we do need to think about if we think outside the box a bit and say, well, we have a whole lot of professional associations, for example, who are developing really good training in line with what's needed by industry and employers at that time. And yet at the moment, there is no recognition for that anywhere inside the accredited framework, unless that association wants to become an RTO. And for those who are listening, who have either been an RTO or sit inside the RTO framework, you understand that that's, at times really a prohibitive process to go through. So we need to come up with a better way of making sure that the real world training that people are doing in the workplace as they need it, at the time they need it, can be formally recognised inside the accredited training system.
Thanks, Amanda. Does anybody else have a view on that, a counter view or consistent view on the sort of the challenges due to the linearity of training and how we make it more flexible and responsive?
Look, I'm happy to jump in, Tim. And
Please.
Look, I think one of the real challenges in this space is that the sheer speed that all of these developments are occurring at, and there obviously isn't scope to slow that down for the system to catch up. So there's a few different elements of responding to that. There's a whole range of system level responses that are really important to try to get right. I think some of the points that were being made around looking at how upskilling and learning and development happens in the workplace are also really important. Building on some of the things that Amanda mentioned. At Australian Industry Group, we have a really strong view that education and training works best when it is deeply connected to the workplace context. And there's real opportunity, in this space and a lot of other spaces to look at how do we ensure that we are best connecting education and training that's happening in all of its forms with the workplace context. Now, there's a whole range of ways that can happen in the vocational education and training system. There's elements where that connection is inherent in the training model, like apprenticeships and traineeships. There's other parts of the vet system where that can happen in other ways. But I think it's particularly relevant for the university sector for us to be thinking about how do we really lean in to things like work integrated learning and really solid partnerships between industry and the education and training sector in our universities, so that we are, to the best extent that we can, connecting what students are learning in our education and training system with the realities of the workplace context, and even better if that's taking place in the workplace setting. I'll drop into the chat for anybody interested some work that we published on that about 6 months or so now, that goes to some of these issues and some of the policy actions that can be taken in response.
Thanks, Brett. Appreciate that.
I was going to add to that.
Yeah, please.
Well, I think it leads in to the question that we're about to talk about, which is, you know, what would be some solutions around this. And I think to add on to both speakers, you know, have done a really wonderful job about, you know, breaking it down, the system not actually catching up very easily. But one size does not fit all. And that's, you know, when I work around all the different cohorts, we would need a qualification for a licensed outcome. And Amanda's aware of that. And that's part of bookkeeping. For an SME, they don't want to do skill sets, qualifications. They want micro credentials. You know, they just want to learn, get in, get out, and go run their business because that's their core focus. And so, you know, and then for a professional, they're probably more likely to either lean to a skill set if they need to upgrade for a specific reason, or lean to micro credentials. So I think at the moment our system is so focused on vocational education, and rightly so. It has a wonderful place in the system, but from a government point of view, I think we need to have a lot more offerings coming out, just not in dribs and drabs. Because even you know, obviously with the Queensland government, we offer micro credentials in like little packages for certain workforces, but not overarching to address the whole workforce. So that would be my kind of offerings on that as well.
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah, absolutely. That resonates with us and what we've heard over the last 6 months or so. I want to move on to the sort of the underlying trend around equity and participation, and Scott and Elizabeth, just putting you on notice that these questions are coming to you. So in the plan, we found that workers most exposed to AI-driven automation are disproportionately women, disproportionately lower paid, and are least likely to receive employer-funded training. And at the same time, we also identified that women remain underrepresented in the leadership roles, making decisions about how the AI gets adopted. Is that something that you're seeing, Scott, across your membership, this compounding disadvantage for a specific group of workers, or is it kind of more diffuse than we suggest in the plan?
Look, I'd agree with what you've stated, Tim. I think, and without being dismissive of all about the challenge that we're going to be facing, I guess what I'd say is what you've described isn't unique with AI, with women in the workforce. Women are overrepresented in all of those categories almost universally, and it's something that we all need to be working collectively to, you know, address, whether that's in the pay gap or this or anything else. I do think it's broader than that, though, when we're talking around parts of the labour market being impacted by this. You know, we've had a lot of discussion around entry-level jobs and what those jobs might be in the future. I think also when we're talking about a lower paid workforce, generally they're seen, you know, even before we had discussions around AI, they were seen as more expendable, more or less, and you know, that's certainly not something that we support from the union movement, but what we're you know, trying to strive for through these discussions with employers and with government when we're talking about a policy response to AI is having, you know, training opportunities that are you know, certified in terms of, you know, you could, at the end of that training, you've got something that's up to an acceptable standard that you could then take with you from one workplace to the other potentially, and have, you know, access to that. There's been talk around how that could be, you know, funded, and there's various forms of that, with, you know, an expansion of through TAFE and the like. But there's going to need to be, in order for the workforce to be available to meet the demand that we're all expecting, a real intensification of the training that's provided for workers through workplace consultations when AI is being rolled out, or whether that's, you know, assistance in terms of redeployment, or when we're looking at labour market employment supports out there, what they can provide, because I think these are areas where we've been challenged as a society anyway, rising to the challenge of those things, and it's going to be exacerbated more with what we anticipate will be with AI.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to pick up on your comments about sort of the entry-level positions narrowing. So our plan was pretty consistent with the report that the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations released a couple of weeks ago on AI in Australia, which found little evidence of kind of widespread labour market disruption from AI, but there is starting to be sort of entry-level and graduate hiring contracting even as broader employment keeps growing. Is that, building on your initial comments, is that something you're genuinely hearing? Do you think that's more of a cyclical dip that will correct itself, or do you think this is part of a longer term trend, or how do you see entry level pathways kind of playing out?
It's difficult for me to say categorically, because I think we're also dealing with a tough labour market right now with the state of the economy and very high interest rates, and the RBA's economic policy doing its thing. We went through there, so I think we would have perhaps seen a contraction in entry level work anyway, and potentially graduate positions. But we're seeing it at this time with AI expansion, and it's probably an environment where employers are perhaps looking for more options to make savings, and then therefore there's less opportunities for those entry level jobs.
Excellent. Yes, agree, Scott. So last question for you, Elizabeth, and same question around sort of workers most exposed to AI-driven automation and the roles most exposed. Is that something that your organisation's seeing play out in the workplace?
I think it's been the case for a long time. I don't think AI has necessarily shifted that. I think you see, particularly in the tech sector, the representation of women inside the tech sector. We're actually losing women from the sector in the last couple of years. So we have to look at that generally as to why people want to leave. And I think more broadly, if I think about the membership base and the ecosystem that I work and live in, it's not just about female representation. There's an ageism issue going on. There's a disability ability issue going on. We see it in SME involvement in, say, for example, government procurement cycles. And I think AI is one part of a bigger problem potentially that we are looking at. So there may be cultural issues about how we look at employment, involvement and inclusion, and AI perhaps is exacerbating elements of those generally. And when it comes to entry level positions, I fear that, yes, I think there's an economic piece here. And then there's this, we hear from Anthropic who say, oh, all of our programmers, we just program with Claude now, and our programmers have become testers, as an example. And the reality is, in order to do that, you have to be terribly experienced in coding to understand whether this thing works or it doesn't work. And so my concern is unintended consequences of not hiring and bringing people in to give them the experience that then allows them at some point in this cycle to take over from those people who are retiring, as an example, to understand what it means to be an excellent coder and to understand why that program just simply doesn't work. So unintended consequences, if AI is driving this, I do agree. I think there are some economic elements that are coming into play, but I think we need to take a step back as employers and representatives and say, what is the consequence of doing this or not doing it? And then what are the unintended consequences of all of our actions? Because ultimately, we as a technology industry, and I'm saying here as technology specifically, we have to represent the communities within which we work and we live. And that means those who sit here in metropolitan Sydney, as well as those out in regional Queensland, Louisa. We have to understand that. And I think we also have to understand that just because I have a device sitting here and a mobile phone, that not everyone has that capability either. So there are other layers to this that are about the digital divide, and those who have and can access access to training and AI and capabilities. If they don't actually have all of the devices and that they need, forget the training. They don't have it anyway, so they can't even start. So this is multifaceted to me, and I think there are pieces of it that we can probably address at a training level, but in doing that, we also have to recognize that we have to support them with the right infrastructure to make that happen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, I'm going to pass over to Peter for audience Q&A as promised. So over to you, Peter. Thanks.
Thank you. We do have a lot of questions and comments coming through the chat. So thank you, everyone, for the discussion that is going on. I just want to pull out a couple of themes very quickly before we jump into a question. So there's a lot of chat going on around that, increasing requirements of entry-level roles and graduates needing experience, but how do you get that experience? So fantastic discussion happening around there. The role around small and medium enterprise issue around being able to access training and support their staff. The knowledge to be able to test AI, as we've just been discussing as well, that's definitely been resonating with a lot of people in the chat as well, and around skills transferability. And then also some great questions coming through around whether AI is potentially adding to or reducing biases as well, which is a really interesting point. But there's a great question here, which I think takes the conversation kind of where we're already starting to head to, which is really exciting. So many employers and learners are looking for skills that didn't exist a few years ago. Yet education and training providers are facing really long lead times to adapt. So we do call that out in the report. But the question here is really about the next steps. So how can we all work together? So industry, education providers, training organisations, unions, FSO and so on. How can we work together better and more effectively to keep workforce capability aligned with those training business needs? So I'll give everyone a second to think about that one, and the first person that comes off of mute gets the first response.
I'll come off mute for that one. So one of my core responsibilities is actually to work with the Queensland Government to provide advice on future-proofing the workforce. And so it is actually happening. I guess it's just not as evident as it would seem because it's all kind of happening in the background. So there is a lot of work happening around, particularly FSO has facilitated a wonderful group of people called the Digital Knowledge Exchange. And they are looking at exactly, which is all made up of state government representatives and territories. And we literally sit in the room and talk about what initiatives could we roll out on a national level that would provide that digital capability uplift that is actually needed by the workforce. And I know from my point of view, from a Queensland Government point of view, we are really looking at how can we get out skills to the workforce, because I look after tech, business and finance, so I'm across the three, quickly enough so that, and we've got the Olympics coming as well, that we're not leaving anyone behind. And we do talk about the digital divide and making sure that that capability piece is very important as well. So that's from, so it is happening. It's just maybe not as evident as what it probably should be.
Cool. Thanks, Louisa. And Brett, I can see you've got come off mute as well.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Look, I'm just going to sort of reiterate the point that I made earlier around work integrated learning, and the more we can connect education and training with the workplace context, that's not going to solve every problem we have or every challenge we have around this pace of change issue. But what it can do is really effectively blend formal qualifications with on-the-job experience and on-the-job learning in real world context. And something that I'm going to mention that Helen has already beat me to it in the chat is we would really encourage a closer look at higher level apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships for some of these white collar roles. It's not something that's applicable in every industry and in every context, but there are particular contexts in which it's really worth a look, and there are a number of successful models already happening in Australia, particularly in South Australia and Victoria at the moment. When we surveyed employers last year around the apprenticeship system, we asked some questions around whether models like this would be applicable to their business, and around 50% of employers identified that some of these high-level apprenticeship style models in new areas would be applicable to their business. So it's certainly something that is worth a closer look.
Brilliant. And Amanda, I think you have also jumped off of mute.
I was just going to say the other thing that we need to consider is we need to consider, I think, in more depth is the applicability of micro-credentials within the space, because that actually has the ability, that gives industry the ability to fill some of these gaps that we're talking about, to fill some of the timing gaps of the amount of time that it takes for an RTO. And look, I'm just going to call it out. I have a huge amount of sympathy for every RTO in this country, because the ground underneath them is shifting so quickly. For them to keep up with the latest technology and the latest advice that goes out, it has to be supported by industry involvement. And that's where the accreditation of micro-credentials really, really comes into its own. So, you know, we're a huge proponent of, you know, the earn while you learn models. So that's incorporating apprenticeships and traineeships and all of those kinds of things as well. So from an industry perspective, it's about sitting back saying, well, if we have these deficits in the formalised training system, how can we actually help fill in some of the gaps? Now, some of that skills training really has to go back to these generalised skills that we've been talking about before, because the tools that they're using adapt so quickly and their ability to keep up. So, for example, if we were to take someone down a path and embed into a training unit something around learning how to use ChatGPT or Claude, well, as I said, you know, we get to 2 years down the track and there's a new fancy bright shiny new tool for them to use. So we need to avoid that level of duplication inside the framework. But what we do need to be able to do is to be able to have learners coming out of the system who can adapt to, so, you know, are they adaptable? Can they work flexibly? Can they communicate between each other? Which sometimes kind of sounds a little bit odd, but the reality is communication is such a huge tool now, especially with such a high volume of working from home that's occurring throughout varying sectors. So I think all of these things come into play, but the generalist skills is a really important part of this conversation of being able to train people problem solving. Carl Green's just put in the chat, that is another one. So being able to, I think it's a multifaceted approach, and we've talked about that on multiple occasions, right, is the fact that we can't just sort of sit back as industry and say, oh, we've just got to wait for the education framework to catch up, because I don't think they can, to be fair to all the stakeholders involved. So that's where, and as I said, but recognition of industry-led, industry-developed micro-credential pathways by the accredited training system will go a very, very long way to actually helping fill some of the, or address some of the issues that we've just raised.
Excellent. Look, we are very rapidly running out of time, but Scott or Elizabeth, did you have any additional or different reflections on that one?
I was actually, oh, sorry, Karen, Scott.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I was just going to quickly endorse really what Amanda had put forward when we're talking about training and those micro-credentials. I think there's a huge discussion to be had around worker input and how that worker input within an organisation will change due to AI, and the training that needs to take place so that those workers can rise to that challenge. I think that's something we all need to collectively work together on.
Here, and I think, and my point would be, regardless of the tool, it's just a tool. And to Amanda's point and to the comments that are coming through in the chat, if you do not know how to problem solve and you don't understand the consequences, let alone the unintended consequences of where you're trying to go, what's the outcome? If you haven't figured out what that outcome is and what the impact is on your customers, as an example, or your employees, it doesn't matter where you start. And I think we need to start going back to thinking about the tools that we have online are just like the toolbox that we carry around if we're a plumber or a joiner or anything else. It helps us do our job, and that critical thinking is critically important.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you so much to all of our panel. Unfortunately, we have now run out of time. I just wanted to very quickly summarise. I think you've done a fantastic job there, Elizabeth. The importance of generalist skills and the capability to use these tools is one theme, I think, coming out of this discussion. Consideration of alternative and more sort of flexible and responsive education training models. The long-standing issues that AI has brought into sharp focus, and that sort of devastating bit of data from Scott about only 15% of ASU members have actually received any AI training. And finally, the consequences of a narrowing entry-level pipeline. Have we thought this through, and what does it actually mean in the long term? So fantastic panel, really grateful for all your input, amazing discussion. Thank you so much online for your engagement and your questions. We will endeavour to come back to you to those questions we haven't answered. Please go in and interact with the Workforce Plan and the FSO intelligence platform. As I said earlier, we'd love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear your feature requests. And thank you all for joining us today. Goodbye.